Hello and welcome to CounterPunch Radio. My name is Eric Draitzer. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming back to the show. First time listeners finding the show, welcome aboard. Always happy to have you. Hope you've had a chance to go over and get a subscription to CounterPunch Plus. That is our exclusive section for our members and subscribers. That is how you can support Counterpunch. We've been around for 30 years. We're going to be around for many more years in the future and bringing you all kinds of insights and analysis from the left, from a variety of perspectives, many of which won't find platforms elsewhere. So go over to Counterpunch, get that subscription. I've been plugging the Counterpunch Plus Journal. That is the best of 2021. Go over to get a $12 copy of that. It's well worth your time. Now, I'm going to move over and get my guest onto the call here. Boris Kagarlitsky is with me. He is one of our favorites at Counterpunch. He is a historian, sociologist, activist, author. He is the chief editor of the online journal robkur.ru, and he is the director of the Institute for Globalization and Social Movements. And most importantly, if you want to follow his most recent writing, which I absolutely could not recommend more highly, go over and subscribe to Russian Dissent. That is on Substack. Russian Dissent is one of the most important subscriptions you're going to make anytime in these months and, well, in 2022. So I highly, highly recommend it. Boris Kagarlitsky, welcome back to Counterpunch.
Hello, Eric.
Thank you so much for giving me some time today. We're recording here on September 9th. So, Boris, I'm just going to ask you, give us the rundown of what's the situation like in Russia. You're in Moscow. What is going on there? People, what is the mood? Are people talking about the war? Are people ignoring it? Is it happening in some far off land? Tell us how the discourse is going.
Hi, Eric. First of all, yes, it's very important that I think now people already started noticing the war, because a major problem during the first months of the war was that it continued taking place kind of unnoticed for the great majority of people in Russia, as if something was happening very, very far away in some distant galaxy, quoting the famous movie. Uh, and yes, things started happening recently when huge majority of Russians started noticing that something is going wrong. Something is going really, really wrong. It is partly because of more and more people getting killed, but also the very fact that the war continues for much longer than it was expected also changed the perception of what was happening, because it was officially announced as some kind of special military operation, something which is a little bit like a kind of commando action, a bit like what United States did in Panama, for example, or something like that, or Grenada. Well, of course, American society noticed these events, but anyhow, these were just one-time operations, and these were not protracted wars affecting lives of millions of people and so on. And the initial perception which the official media wanted to establish and promote was exactly like, well, there is something happening in Ukraine. It doesn't really matter for many of us, and some special troops are in action, but that's it. And then the first change was when, after 6 months of military activities, quite a lot of people who trusted the official media started asking questions. Why is it going on for so long, and what is it happening? What is it? What is it happening there in Ukraine really? And also, the official media failed to give us any explanations. There is one point which is very important. It's not because of the lack of information on the official side. Actually, there are loads, tons of materials on the official media with some kind of war propaganda. The point is that most people in Russia did not bother, and even now don't bother watching these television programs, or reading these newspapers, or even they're not interested in going for it online in the internet. because the great majority of Russian society, the tremendous majority, maybe 85% of the population, are totally apolitical. They're totally uninterested in anything political. And the point is exactly what happened to these people. And it seems that, well, about a month or two ago, these people started asking questions, and these people started getting interested and involved with what's going on. That's one aspect of the situation. And then all of a sudden, even the official sociological survey institution called ВЦИРОМ, which is very, very close to the Kremlin and which is very much part of the propaganda infrastructure of Russian elite, suddenly published a report that the support for the war was declining. It was published already about a week ago, and it was not just 1 or 2%, it was massively declining. So it means that the official media has to recognize the fact that the things are getting out of control, and the public perception of the war is changing, and people, even those people who are not necessarily in opposition to the war, are feeling tired of it. And they're starting asking questions about whether it's going to happen and how is it going to, whether it's good, sorry, people are starting asking questions whether it's going to stop and how is it going to stop and so on. So in that sense, the public mood is very, very different. And now compared to 3 or 4 months ago. And the second aspect of the situation is the development of military situation on the ground in Ukraine. And Ukrainian counteroffensive became a very important factor. First of all, because the very fact that Ukrainian army was able to start a counteroffensive contradicted everything which was said on official television, which was said on the official pro-Kremlin media, and so on. And then, to make things worse, the counteroffensive happened to become very successful. Right now, we are following the events near and around Balakleya town in northeastern Ukraine, where Russian troops happened to be defeated massively and now seem to be on the run. And that is also a very humiliating fact, which also damaged their propaganda and damaged the ideology of the so-called state patriots. So in that sense, the situation is changing. It seems, again, we cannot prove it because this is the information which I get from the Telegram channels, which are very often anonymous, so I cannot prove it. But it seems that there is a tremendous anger among the military. Because at this point, the military are already quite aware that they were forced to fight a war without any chance of winning it. So they're very angry at the political leadership who made them suffer these defeats and humiliations. And just yesterday, there was supposedly, according to the Telegram channels, there was a conversation between Putin and one of his generals, who just said a phrase which maybe will become historical. He said, "Dear dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, you failed it." And this is something which now people repeat. They failed it, you see. So it seems that something is going to change. How fast, we don't know, but it's going to change. The big question is, what kind of change are we going to expect? Because It is already very clear that the war is not going to be won. It's going to be lost. But what will be the consequences? That is the big question, and that is something we have to discuss. And I have I can make some predictions, possibly, but uh, the important thing that we are right now facing a turning point here in Moscow and in Russia.
It's very interesting to think of it as a turning point. I want to return to the poll that you just mentioned, coming from basically the official polling from the Kremlin. Why would they release something that clearly demonstrates that their public relations and marketing has failed?
Well, I think there are two problems here. One problem is that there are certain things they cannot hide. So if they release that, it shows that the situation is really desperate. So there is no way you can keep hiding it. And the change in the public opinion is very dramatic and visible. But this is only one side of the story, or one possible explanation. Another explanation is a little bit more conspirological, but still has to be taken seriously. It is very clear that at least some of the people in the Kremlin are 100% certain now that some kind of a compromise has to be made with the West and with the current Ukrainian government. The problem here is not that much even the position of the West or the position of Ukrainians. The major problem, ironically, is Russian propaganda itself. Because, first of all, for a period of like 5 months or more, they depicted this war as some kind of existential struggle between Russian world, as they call it, or Russian society, or Russian people, and the rest of the world, which has only one aim, only one goal, which is to exterminate Russians and to eliminate Russian civilization, and so on and so on. So it was presented as an existential struggle where we have to fight and die or kill everybody, but there is no other options. There are no other options, and now they're actually looking for a compromise. So how can you make a compromise? How make a peace deal with an existential enemy? This is one story, side of the story. Also, how can you and why should you make a deal and a compromise with somebody who is, according to your own explanation, is completely defeated and destroyed, and we just have to wait for another couple of weeks or months till Ukraine collapses and the West collapses, and so on and so on. So in both ways, propaganda was working on rising expectations and feelings which were totally inadequate. And they created some kind of mood within some part of the society. It's not the majority of society, but it's an essential part of the society, which was actually expecting some tremendous successes, tremendous triumph. And now at least some people in the Kremlin, now they're looking for an opportunity to bring down these expectations, to bring the society and their groups supporting the regime closer to reality. And it seems that this is now one major effort which is becoming visible, more and more visible by the day. Just recently, there were some very interesting events because first, in the anonymous Telegram channels, there was a report that Putin was very angry at Vladimir Solovyov, who is the major person for the propaganda mafia for this industry. And well, the the point was that Putin supposedly made a statement that these people kind of went too far and they're becoming a problem. And then a few days after that anonymous publication, Solovyov was badly beaten by somebody. And he even had to appear on television, online, with his face just showing the traces of him being beaten. And when he was asked by somebody some colleagues, what happened, he refused to answer. So the answer which appeared online in the Telegram channels was that he was beaten by the people from the security police, FSO, which is one of the security services in Russia, who actually were trying to make him shut up. So don't promote this jingoist propaganda anymore. We don't need it anymore. You have to shut up and stop it, because now the policy is going to change and we are going to move in a totally different direction. And that shows that there is a growing conflict within the establishment, because speaking about propaganda people and so-called patriotic segments of the society and patriotic segments of the elite, you should not forget that they are not dominant in the society. Now, nobody is dominant with the society, because the society is apolitical, as I mentioned before. But they are very influential, and they are trying to influence the decision making, the control the decision making, including to control Putin himself. And it seems that at this point, the most reasonable part of the Kremlin team is getting angry at them and is getting scared that these people are pulling us into the direction where we all are going to face a lot of problems, including those people in the Kremlin. So there is a tremendous struggle, and there is a real attempt to kind of reorient the Titanic, to reorient the course of Titanic. But it is already a Titanic. There's no doubt about it.
Well, speaking of Titanics and things that might be sinking, tell us a little bit about the economic situation in Russia. We hear quite often in the West, whether it's in mainstream publications like the Wall Street Journal, or whether it's in, left-wing publications or what have you, that while the Europeans have shot themselves in the foot and the Americans have, done what they've done, the Russians have weathered the storm. They've managed to strengthen the ruble, prop up the economy, and more or less the sanctions haven't hurt them. I've, of course, argued against that and basically made the point that most of the damage is being concealed from Western eyes, but that it is happening. So I want to get an insight from you. What is the economic situation like? I understand store shelves aren't empty, but what is the real economic situation like? How are people really being affected, especially working class Russians?
Well, the store shelves are not empty. It's absolutely true. But the question is why? And the question, and the answer to this question is very simple. People can't buy anymore. The income, the revenues of working class people is down. Lots of people are either losing their jobs or losing their incomes, and they can't buy certain products, even certain food. And then, of course, there are no shortages. Why should there be shortages when people are not able to buy? That's market economy. That's capitalism, stupid, in that sense, you should not compare that with the former Soviet Union. When there were economic problems, they ended up in shop shelves becoming empty. But within capitalism, it is totally different. It's not about the shelves of the stores; it's about the pockets of the people, and the pockets are empty. That's what's happening. And also, high ruble, the high exchange rate of the ruble is a tremendous disaster for both for the government and for the population, because first of all, middle class and especially low middle class people kept their savings in the dollars for the last 20 years. So when the dollar collapsed, it means that millions of Russians lost their savings. That's the real meaning of the increasing exchange rate of the ruble. And ironically, the situation of the Minister of Finance is exactly the same. Because the Minister of Finance is complaining about the ruble being too high. Why? Because usually the system worked in such a way that Russia got dollars and euros for its exports, which are mostly oil and gas, as you know. And then it was transferred into, exchanged into Russian rubles, which were, in a certain sense, undepreciated. And then you understand the lower is the exchange rate of the ruble, the more money the government got in its budget. So the rubles were used to pay salaries for the people working for the government, pensions, subsidies, welfare, welfare expenditure, and so on and so on, infrastructure. So now, with the very high exchange rate of the ruble, the government doesn't get enough rubles to pay its expenditure, its expenses. So, and then the question is, why is Russian ruble so high if nobody wants it? And the answer is very simple: because of the collapse of their exports, of the imports. So, excuse me, the collapse of the imports. So, what's happening? That you see that Russian oil and Russian gas continue to be sold abroad. That's absolutely true, and even the prices increased. So the quantity of dollars coming into Russia, to some extent, remained stable or even increased. But at the very same moment, their imports collapsed, and with imports collapsing, nobody is interested in buying dollars, because what are you going to do with these dollars? There is no way you can spend them. There is no way you can buy anything abroad with these dollars or euros. And that led to the situation when, of course, the market worked against the dollar in favor of the ruble. The ruble, with a lack of demand for the dollars and euros, the exchange rate decreased. Central bank and the Ministry of Finance made a few attempts to increase the exchange rate of the dollar, but it didn't work out, because then you have to spend a lot of money just to work to act against your own currency, which is very absurd. And to destabilize your own currency. And also, there is another danger, that once they really go the other way around, once they manage to depreciate the ruble, there is no clear red line where it's going to stop. Maybe so. You can work on the ruble, trying to depreciate it somewhat, and then it will collapse. So that's not something central bank would like to happen. Also, don't forget that you can hardly buy any dollar cash in Moscow. It's very hard. You can, but it's very hard. So cash is difficult to get at this point. And this is another symptom that the economy is facing problems getting access to actual cash. And well, in general, yes, I should say that there the feeling of ordinary people about their life is very different compared to what it used to be, say, a year ago. In the sense that the life of ordinary Russians was very difficult, very hard a year ago. People were very poor, and they were getting poorer and poorer by the day already a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago. So the situation deteriorated for quite a few years, and it's just gradually deteriorating the same way, at the same pace as it used to. So in that sense, you cannot even say whether it's sanctions or war or anything, because it was bad, it's getting worse, it's going to get worse, and that's how it is normal for here. So the panic you can see among economic managers. These people are really panicking. These people are really panicking because they don't know what to do with their businesses. They don't know how to sell. They don't know how to get the spare parts. They don't know how to deal with logistics. And once you speak to the people who are in business, who are in their management of big companies, these people are really, really desperate.
One of the most important things I find in reading your analysis, Boris, and in just talking to you over the years and knowing is that you have insights that I think you're able to articulate for Western left audience so that they can understand things in better context. And so, with that in mind, I want to ask you to address what is probably the most popular talking point among those on the left who, for various reasons, bolster some of the Kremlin's talking points, and that being that the war isn't really about Ukraine. It isn't really about domestic issues or anything like that. This is really ultimately about the United States and NATO's eastward expansion towards the footsteps of to the doorstep of Russia, and the promises made at the end of the Soviet period that NATO wouldn't expand. And so, really, Putin is only simply reacting to NATO's expansion. Can you give us your take on that quote unquote analysis that some leftists like to use? And then from there, give us your insights into what really motivated Russia and Putin to make what is clearly this historic strategic blunder.
It is true that Western policies towards Eastern Europe and Russia were imperialist. There is no doubt about it. And NATO expansion was real, and NATO was really getting to the doorsteps of Russia even without any real reason for that to happen if you are taking the period of early 2000s up to probably 2010, 2012. Because ironically, it was exactly the Putin's war against Ukraine which post factum gave justification to the nation expansion in Eastern Europe. If we were taking the previous period, the NATO expansion could not be justified by the conflict with Russia because there was no such conflict. Ironically, however, NATO had its own motives to expand into Eastern Europe, which and former Soviet Union, which had very little to do with Russia either. The reason was that NATO needed human and military resources of these countries. So you get more and more countries involved in the NATO operations. Then you can send these people, say, to Iraq or somewhere else. The Ukrainians sent to Iraq. Actually, Russia was also involved very, very heavily in these operations, as you know, because up to very, very recently, there was a NATO air base in Russia, which was used to fly supplies and sometimes troops to Afghanistan. So Russia was very, very much part of the NATO eastward expansion. And this is a very interesting, a very ironic point, because now a lot of people are saying that, well, if not for the military action, there would have been NATO bases in Ukraine. But the irony is that so far there were never any NATO bases in Ukraine, but there was a NATO base in Russia itself, which is something which is very often forgotten. But again, eastwards expansion of NATO was part of Western imperialist policies. But the interesting point is that up to probably 2014, it had very little to do with Russia. It was much more about Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, and well, maybe China to some extent, and so on. And this is one side of the coin. And the other side of the coin, which is Russian sub-imperialism, let's put it this way, because Russian elites accumulated enormous quantities of money, of hard currency throughout the Putin era. And this is a very typical crisis of overaccumulation, as it was described by Rosa Luxemburg in her famous book. And that means that Russian elite accumulated much more money, much more capital that it could use and invest inside its own country. The kind of structure we have of Russian economy, which is totally dependent on global markets and dependent on the export of raw materials to the West and to China, is not encouraging Russian business to invest into manufacturing or welfare or education or science and so on. All these sectors, including infrastructure, were terribly disinvested throughout these periods. At the same time, the quantity of money accumulated both by the state and by the private sector is enormous. And that led to a specific type of expansionism, because Russian corporations were interested in taking over companies and resources, especially resources, in the former countries of Soviet Union. Ukraine was of special interest, but also Moldova, also Kazakhstan, and so on and so on. And here there was a very classical capitalist imperialist conflict between different competitors, because also Western capital, Western corporations were moving into the same markets, and there was a very standard classical competition, not so much about who is going to sell what, but it was very much about who was going to control the available resources in these countries, which were even poorer than Russia, by far more poor. So the expansion of Russian capital inside Ukraine was a major source of conflict between especially Russia and the European Union. In that sense, interestingly enough, Americans didn't play a major role up to very recently. Of course, they played a political role, but the real capitals which were involved were not so much from the United States. These were mainly German, Dutch, interestingly enough, Dutch capitals. And so there was definitely a classical case of capitalist competition between Russian capitalists and European Union capitalists over Ukrainian market, which is a standard capitalist case for a war.
And the last time that we spoke, Boris, unfortunately, we had technical issues, but you had gone into an explanation that I thought was really important for people to understand that, of course, yes, everybody understands it's like a priori knowledge that the United States is an imperialist power, NATO is its military power projection arm, and imperialists do what imperialists do. But you mentioned in our prior conversation, one, the disaster of the election results in, what was that, a year and a half ago now, the disastrous election, the fact that the United Russia Party was unable, even with the vote rigging and everything, was unable to really come out looking like anything but embarrassed or humiliated, the protests on the streets. Talk a little bit about some of these domestic issues that you have argued previously were some of the key drivers of this invasion rather than these external forces like the US, NATO, these inter imperialist rivalries, and so forth.
Definitely, I already have spoken about that a lot, so I have to return back to that point, which I mentioned in the previous conversation with you and some other articles. Uh, this is a point which is very often not really appreciated by the Western media, both leftist and the mainstream media, because actually, it seems that Western public doesn't really care about what's happening with the Russian society as such. So in that sense, very often, if you read Western media, it seems that Russia is a kind of monolithic country which is controlled by an autocratic government. The government is um, presented in a very negative way, but nobody discusses what's happening with and in the society. And yes, this is exactly what I mentioned before, that September elections of 2021, which were held in the conditions of not only vote rigging, but also tremendous pressure on the opposition, with quite a few opposition candidates not even being able to participate and so on, uh, in the situation with the total control of the media and repression and so on, still led to the collapse of United Russia vote in most important centers like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Ekaterinburg, in Siberia, and so on and so on. They lost the election. They failed it miserably, even though they did everything to prevent opposition from actually campaigning or really being able to compete for votes properly. And of course, that led to the situation when vote rigging went up to the levels which were unexperienced even in Russia. Because yes, vote rigging is normal, electoral fraud is kind of normal, but they went up to the levels which were unprecedented even for Russian standards. Like in Moscow, the candidates of United Russia lost most of the constituencies by far, and then the day after the election, after the votes were already counted, they recounted votes, saying that there was so-called electronic voting, online voting, and also they said that online voting allowed people to re-vote, to kind of reconsider their vote. So they said that, well, most people who voted online reconsidered their votes, and instead of voting for the opposition, they post factum voted for the government party, which was a tremendous scandal, provoking also opposition rallies, and there was a new wave of repression after that, and so on. But the election was only a symptom. It was not that much of a problem. It was only a symptom, because it has shown that the level of popularity, not only for the United Russia Party, but also for Putin and for the system, for the regime, was extremely low, and was going under, really going under. Putin's popularity, according to some uh, polls went down to the level of say 20%, which was unprecedented. And at that point, they really needed to do something to reconsider, kind of reunite the society, to get some kind of realignment around the president, the government, the regime, and so on, and at the same time, kind of restructure the system, turning it into a more controlled, even more authoritarian, or even quite kind of totalitarian, to reconsolidate the system around Putin and so on. If you read what pro-government pundits and even some officials were writing and saying about, say, Ukraine or about Russian people and so on, it was very much like the traditional Nazi stuff. Like now they use these terms, one nation, one leader, for example. This is already part of the official language. One nation, one leader. One country, one nation, one leader, and one victory, as they say. That's the official slogan. So it's very much what the Third Reich was using in the Second World War. By the way, it doesn't mean that Russia is getting fascist. It's not true. It's the fact is that some segments of Russian current leadership wanted, I stress, wanted Russia to become a fascist country, and they failed to achieve it. They failed. It's another failure. It's like failing the war. They're also failing fascism. They're failing everything, including the attempts to make Russia a fascist country. It's another failure. But anyhow, that was part of the project. So you have to start a war, and this war is going to be a tremendous and very fast success. Ukraine is going to collapse within hours or days, and then we will have this incredible triumph that we will kind of reconsolidate the country, and Putin will be national hero again. And well, it will be very much like in 2014, when after the annexation of Crimea, the country was more or less reconsolidated around the slogan of Crimean consensus. And it was true, by the way, that people did see the annexation of Crimea as a positive thing, partly because Crimean population welcomed the annexation, don't forget that. And they wanted to replay the Crimean consensus, to remake it. They failed. They failed, and now they're facing the consequences.
So, in the time that we have remaining, I want to talk about some related issues to that. One of the things about the Russian army that I've talked about in several videos that is very interesting, especially for those of us in the United States, is the way in which the military is, to a large extent, comprised of soldiers on the front lines who come from the poorest parts of the country, who are often economically living on the margins in extreme poverty, for whom the military is sort of a way out. It's a career, it's a way to support their families. And so we find that many of these regions provide so much of the cannon fodder that is dying in Ukraine. So my question for you then is, those regions, especially places like Dagestan and Chechnya and elsewhere that have provided so many of these soldiers, do we see any evidence of unrest? Say mothers of dead soldiers who are speaking to each other. This is a phenomenon we've seen in many countries, in many wars, in many contexts. So I want to get a sense of, from your perspective, what's happening outside of St. Petersburg and Moscow in some of these other parts of the country.
First of all, there are different regions. Russia is not only a huge country, it's also a country which is composed of very different regions with very different societies. And for example, if we are speaking about Northern Caucasus, Yes, quite a few people who serve in the army and serve in Ukraine are coming from these regions. Uh, but in a certain sense, for those regions, it's also a chance to make some kind of career and escape from poverty. And so far, we don't see any signs of unrest in the Northern Caucasus. Um, At the same time, there are also plenty of people who are coming from depressed Russian regions, regions with ethnic Russian population, but especially these are rural areas. And these villages are remote from each other. So sometimes it's hundreds or thousands of kilometers between these villages. So there is very little communication. So even when you learn that 5 or 10 people died in that or this village, it doesn't make any difference because there is total discommunication between these places. So, in that sense, the major source of opposition used to be and is in the big cities. But don't forget, Russia is a country of quite a few big cities, and here people are getting increasingly angry. And also in some regions which are close to Ukrainian border, you find the mood which is changing. First of all, yes, when I was in Kursk, for example, just recently, there was always news about people who got killed there, not necessarily from the city itself, but also from the province. And people were angry. And in places like Kursk or Belgorod, close to Ukrainian frontier, there are quite a few people who have relatives on the other side of the border who are also communicating with them, who are reporting the devastation which is taking place in Ukraine, the damage caused by the Russian army, and that is influencing the public opinion. So these provinces are getting increasingly unloyal to the central government. And the other very interesting example is Buryatia. It's also a very poor ethnic area, and Buryats were also very important in terms of providing cannon fodder for the army. And now there is a strong movement in Buryatia. It's probably the first major ethnic region of Russia with a strong anti-war movement. And interestingly enough, they are going to have elections there in 2 days from now, the election of the governor of the province. There are Communist Party candidate, Vyacheslav Markhaev, who himself used to be a military officer, was not allowed to run for the job of the governor because also he spoke out publicly against the war. And the Communist Party was forced to run a different candidate. But the central leadership of the Communist Party is totally in the pocket of Zyuganov, totally in the pocket of the Kremlin. Uh, the local party leaders in some places are very critical, both of their own party leadership and of what the Kremlin is doing and of the war. And Buryatia is one of the cases, and we will see how will the election go, because of course there will be massive electoral fraud, and they will declare a united Russia victory anyhow, no matter what happens. But it seems that in Buryatia, quite a few people will try to use the opportunity to vote against United Russia to show their opposition to the war. Of course, their votes will not be properly counted, and we'll see how it will affect the society there.
Okay, Boris, in the couple of minutes we have remaining, I want to ask one final question and then give you an opportunity to speak on what you think is coming, whether you want to call it a prediction or an educated guess or what have you. But I want to just ask you very quickly about um, the ways in which this can move forward. And what I mean by that is the United States and NATO, the imperial system and the strategic planners that make decisions for the empire, they're not just going to allow Putin to come to some negotiating table and compromise and walk away from this. They want to bleed Russia. They want to force Russia into a quagmire that, disastrous effects of which would last for decades. So my question then is, as you mentioned earlier, that the Kremlin seems to be making moves towards potentially shifting towards compromise. How is that even possible, given the forces that are arrayed? Not only the United States and its desire to bleed Russia, but also the fact that the opinion polls in Ukraine show vast majorities of the country have zero interest in negotiating with the invading army. So, how do we move forward, even if the Kremlin wants to compromise?
Well, the Kremlin is not just Putin. It's much more than one person, as you can imagine. And well, it seems that there is a kind of consensus in the elite at this point that the war is lost and there is no way you can even try to win it. You have to try to achieve some kind of compromise. That's the kind of consensus. There is one problem there. The problem is called Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. How are they going to solve this problem? I don't really know. And you see, it's not that Putin doesn't want to negotiate. It's not the problem that Putin is against negotiation. The problem is that nobody will negotiate with Putin because he's too toxic. And their perspective for the Russian elite at this stage is Putinism without Putin. So getting rid of Putin somehow, and so far I think they don't know how to do it, how to get it, but getting rid of Putin somehow, and then, well, you can declare tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, that, well, there is a regime change. Well, Putin is gone. Without Putin, Russia is turning to a totally opposite direction. And it not only it wants to negotiate, it wants to cooperate. And the day after tomorrow, possibly all these people who were writing some patriotic articles about the existential animosity between Russians and Ukrainians would be writing articles and making statements praising Ukraine and praising the West and so on and so on, as long as we can get to the status quo ante, maybe the status quo ante of, say, 2014, for example. And so on. Russian troops withdrawing from Ukraine, definitely a few people who are associated with the propaganda effort of this war would be punished. Maybe a few politicians would be used as scapegoats. Uh, so the idea is that, well, you have to find the scapegoats and find the way to negotiate with the West and try to keep everything as it used to be. The red line at this point is that Crimea should stay under Russian control. And by the way, here I think it is quite reasonable because neither Russian officials nor Ukrainian officials, no Western officials even consider what do Crimean people think about this. You see, if you are if you are following the discourse on the Russian side or on the Ukrainian or Western side, it's all about territory. Crimea should belong to Russia because it used to be part of Russia for some years, okay? Or it should belong to Ukraine because it used to be Ukrainian before 2014. Or it used to be Ukrainian according to Western standards because legally this territory is Ukrainian. The problem is that people in the Crimean Peninsula don't want to be Ukrainians. I'm not sure they want to be Russians, by the way, but they definitely don't want to be part of Ukraine. This is a very important point. So I think some kind of referendum is quite a logical issue, a logical solution. But the question is whether it's going to happen. But I think that the really important issue for the Russian elite is not the Crimea. Crimea is important, but not that important. The really important issue is to regain the opportunity to sell Russian resources abroad and to regain the opportunity to invest Russian money abroad. As I told you, the crisis of overaccumulation is very serious. It's one of the causes of the war. So without the capacity of exporting capital, Russian ruling class is not properly capable of functioning. Because if you want Russian money to be invested inside Russia, you need a different kind of economy and a different kind of ruling class and a different kind of system and so on. So they are totally determined to kind of negotiate their way back into the world system. And well, the question is, how are they going to solve the problem of Putin? It is getting increasingly interesting that the military establishment is now very angry, and they are angry at Putin. They are angry at Shoigu and Gerasimov, the two top persons who are associated with the decision to start the war. Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, and Gerasimov, the head of the head of staff. Both people are extremely unpopular with the military. So we're going to see what's going to happen, especially if the military defeat is not only becoming inevitable, but becoming already a fact of daily life. And that's basically what the elites have in mind. The question is whether it's going to work their way. And again, speaking about what Western governments want to do with Russia, don't forget about Russia itself. Don't all these calculations, all these theories and strategies, they just do not consider the existence of Russian population, Russian people, Russian society. And here is the major problem, because I'm pretty sure that once Putin's regime is gone, or at least when it's beginning to change itself, that will release tremendous social energy, which will work towards political and social change. And it's not just for Russia alone, because the neoliberal capitalist system is in crisis globally. This war is just one of the symptoms of the global crisis of the neoliberal capitalist model. The same way as the First World War was the symptom of the crisis of the classical liberal capitalist model of the late 19th century or early 20th century. And in that sense, Russia, again, in many ways, is following the same path as it was following in the 1916, 1917. I'm not going to say it's going to be the same story. It's going to be a very different story. But, well, this is a tremendous feeling of déjà vu. We are very much in the same type of crisis. It's not the same crisis, but the same type of crisis, when the old elite is unable to get out of the trap in which it jumped already, and well, they're doomed. They're doomed, and Russia is not.
That's very well said. Boris Kagarlitsky has been with me. I could talk to Boris for hours and hours, but we won't do that today. Boris Kagarlitsky is somebody you should be reading. Go over to Russian Descent on Substack, subscribe to that. Make sure that you are reading it every single time it arrives in your email. Boris Kagarlitsky, again, he is the chief editor of the online journal Rabkor. That's Russian language, Rabkor, RABKOR.ru. If you have any Russian skills, I highly recommend you subscribe there and follow, translations and so forth. Boris Kagarlitsky, you could follow him also on social media. Boris, thank you so much for chatting with us and helping us understand all of these things.
Thank you, Eric.
Listeners, thank you as always, and we will chat again next time.